What's going on, guys? It's Greg here, aka NYPrepper. It is Tuesday, July 12th, 2022, and I wanted to talk to you guys about Starfish Prime, which was the largest, most powerful EMP test ever in human history, and it was conducted by the U.S. military. And just 3 days ago, on July 9th, we had the 60-year anniversary of this test, okay? So I thought it would be a good opportunity to give you guys a detailed description of this test, because as preppers, we need to be aware of the effects of EMPs, and the Starfish Prime test was the most powerful EMP test ever conducted in human history. So there's a lot we can learn from this test. So I'm getting all this information from Wikipedia, which has a lot of good information. But if you don't know what an EMP is an electromagnetic pulse, which is generated from a high altitude detonation of a nuclear warhead. And all nuclear warheads generate an EMP, but when a nuclear warhead is detonated at high altitudes, it allows that EMP to propagate further, okay, because it's not absorbed by the ground as much, because the EMP is detonated in Earth's atmosphere. Typically, what's considered a high altitude detonation is around 300 miles above Earth's surface. And this EMP test was so powerful that it knocked out the power to Hawaii 1,000 miles away from the detonation point. So I want to just read to you some of the details of this test, and I have some photos here that I want to share with you. What you're looking at is a picture taken from Hawaii of the actual detonation through the clouds, okay? The entire sky lit up orange the night that this test occurred. I mean, look at that, guys. That just looks absolutely crazy. Could you imagine seeing something like that? And there were even reports that people were throwing parties on the night of the test, and they were anxiously awaiting the test to see what it would look like. Now, this detonation triggered auroras, or aurora borealis. That's how powerful it was, okay? It artificially generated northern lights, which is just absolutely crazy. So the Starfish Prime was a high-altitude nuclear test conducted by the United States, a joint effort of the Atomic Energy Commission and the Defense Atomic Support Agency. It was launched from Johnson Atoll on July 9th, 1962, and was the largest nuclear test conducted in outer space, and one of 5 conducted by the U.S. in space. All right, so this was 60 years ago. A Thor rocket carrying a W-49 thermonuclear warhead designed at Los Alamos Laboratory and an Mk2 re-entry vehicle was launched from Johnson Atoll in the Pacific Ocean, about 900 miles west-southwest of Hawaii. The explosion took place at an altitude of 250 miles above a point 19 miles southwest of Johnson Atoll. It had a yield of 1.4 megatons. The explosion was about 10 degrees above the horizon as seen from Hawaii at 11 p.m. Hawaii time. All right, so the W-49 nuclear warhead had a yield of 1.4 megatons, guys. That is just absolutely insane to be detonating such a powerful warhead in space. That must have just been so surreal to see the pictures. The Starfish Test was one of 5 high-altitude tests grouped together as Operation Fishbowl within the larger Operation Dominic, a series of tests in 1962 begun in response to the Soviet announcement on August 3, 1961, that they would end a 3-year moratorium on testing. In 1958, the United States had completed 6 high-altitude nuclear tests that produced many unexpected results and raised many new questions. According to the U.S. government project officer's interim report on the Starfish Prime project, previous high-altitude nuclear tests, Yucca, Teak, and Orange, plus the 3 Argos shots, were poorly instrumented and hastily executed. Despite thorough studies of the meager data, present models of these bursts are sketchy and tentative. These models are too uncertain to permit extrapolation to other altitudes and yields with any confidence. Thus, there is a strong need not only for better instrumentation, but for further tests covering a range of altitudes and yields. Okay, so they decided they wanted to do this fishbowl series of tests to test various power levels of warheads at different altitudes to see what the effects are by varying the altitude and varying the yield of the warhead, what the effects are when you do that. And they wanted to have better instrumentation to record the effects. Okay, so that is why they did these fishbowl tests, and specifically the Starfish Prime test. The Starfish test was originally planned as the second in the fishbowl series, but the first launch, Bluegill, was lost by the radar tracking equipment and had to be destroyed in flight. The initial Starfish launch attempt on June 20 was also aborted in flight, this time due to failure of the Thor launch vehicle. The Thor missile flew a normal trajectory for 59 seconds, then began to break apart. The range safety officer ordered the destruction of the missile and the warhead. The missile was between 30,000 and 35,000 feet in altitude when it was destroyed. Part of the missile and some radioactive contamination fell upon Johnson Atoll and nearby Sand Island and the surrounding ocean. So they initially tried to do the test on June 20, and it failed due to the Thor rocket, so they destroyed that Thor rocket mid-air. There was an issue with the rocket. On July 9th, 1962, at 900 hours Coordinated Universal Time, which translates to 11 p.m. Honolulu time, the Starfish Prime test was detonated at an altitude of 250 miles. The coordinates of the detonation were 16 degrees 28 minutes north and 169 degrees 38 minutes west. The actual weapon yield came very close to the design yield, which various sources have set at different values in the range of 1.4 to 1.45 megatons. The nuclear warhead detonated 13 minutes 41 seconds after liftoff of the Thor missile from Johnson Atoll. Starfish Prime caused an electromagnetic pulse that was far larger than expected, so much larger that it drove much of the instrumentation off the scale, causing great difficulty in getting accurate measurements. The Starfish Prime electromagnetic pulse also made those effects known to the public by causing electrical damage in Hawaii 900 miles away from the detonation point, knocking out about 300 streetlights, setting off numerous burglar alarms, and damaging a telephone company microwave link. The EMP damage to the microwave link shut down telephone calls from Kauai to the other Hawaiian islands. A total of 27 small rockets were launched from the Johnson Atoll to obtain experimental data from the Starfish Prime detonation. In addition, a large number of rocket-borne instruments were launched from Barking Sands, Kauai, in the Hawaiian Islands. A large number of United States military ships and aircraft were operating in support of Starfish Prime in the Johnson Atoll area and across the nearby North Pacific region. A few military ships and aircraft were also positioned in the region of the South Pacific Ocean near the Samoan Islands. This location was at the southern end of the magnetic field line of the Earth's magnetic field from the position of the nuclear detonation, an area known as the Southern Conjugate Region for the test. An uninvited scientific expeditionary ship from the Soviet Union was stationed near Johnson Atoll for the test, and another Soviet scientist expeditionary ship was in the Southern Conjugate Region near the Samoan Islands. So the Soviets wanted to see what this thing was going to do, and they were obviously not invited. After the Starfish Prime detonation, bright auroras were observed in the detonation area, as well as in the Southern Conjugate Region on the other side of the equator from the detonation. According to one of the first technical reports, the visible phenomena due to the burst were widespread and quite intense. A very large area of the Pacific was illuminated by the auroral phenomena. From far south of the South Magnetic Conjugate area through the burst area to the far north of the North Conjugate area near the French frigate shoals. At twilight after the burst, resonant scattering of light from lithium and other debris was observed at Johnson and French frigate shoals for many days, confirming the long-time presence of debris in the atmosphere. An interesting side effect was that the Royal New Zealand Air Force was aided in anti-submarine maneuvers by the light from the bomb. So the light was so powerful that the New Zealand Air Force was able to use that light to spot subs, probably Soviet or Chinese subs, in the Pacific. That is just crazy, guys. Could you imagine that? These auroral effects were partially anticipated by Nicholas Christopoulos, a scientist who had earlier worked on the Operation Argus high-altitude nuclear shots. According to U.S. atomic veteran Cecil R. Cole, some hotels in Hawaii offered rainbow bomb parties on their roofs for Starfish Prime, contradicting some reports that the artificial aurora was unexpected. So they were expecting some auroras, and people were planning parties for it so they could see the aurora. A 2006 report described the particle and field measurements of the Starfish diamagnetic cavity and the injected beta flux into the artificial radiation belt. These measurements described the explosion from 0.1 milliseconds to 16 minutes after the detonation. So then they talk about the after effects here. While some of the energetic beta particles followed the Earth's magnetic field and illuminated the sky, other high-energy electrons became trapped and formed radiation belts around the Earth. There was much uncertainty and debate about the composition, magnitude, and potential adverse effects from the trapped radiation after the detonation. The weaponeers became quite worried when 3 satellites in low Earth orbit were disabled. These included Track and Transit 4B. The half-life of the energetic electrons was only a few days. At the time, it was not known that solar and cosmic particle fluxes varied by a factor of 10 and energies could exceed, I don't know what this is, 1 MeV. In the months that followed, these man-made radiation belts eventually caused 6 or more satellites to fail as radiation damaged their solar arrays or electronics, including the first commercial relay communication satellite, Telstar, as well as the United Kingdom's first satellite, the Ariel 1. Detectors on Telstar, Track, Engine, and Ariel 1 were used to measure distribution of the radiation produced by the tests. In 1963, it was reported that Starfish Prime had created a belt of MeV electrons. In 1968, it was reported that some starfish electrons had remained in the atmosphere for 5 years, guys. That is crazy. So it took out the the UK's first satellites, the Telstar and the Ariel 1, and a bunch of satellites were taken out by the resulting radiation that stayed in the atmosphere. And several months later, the satellites were taken out. So, guys, this was 60 years ago, okay? This type of weapon 60 years ago. Imagine what they have now and the technology they have now and how they perfected it. So this is just crazy, guys. Wanted to just share this with you. I think it's pretty interesting. And here's a picture of the artificial aurora that was generated by the Starfish Prime test. I think it's pretty cool. But look at the sky, guys. Could you imagine seeing that at night? That must have been so surreal. But that's pretty much it, guys. Take care, God bless, and don't forget the 3 Ps. Prepare, practice, and persevere.